Afternoon, everyone. With the blessings of His Holiness, Shri Deshikendra Mahaswamiji, I welcome you all for the webinar on database application development. Today we have Mr. Chetan Anand, CEO and founder of Newfound Systems. Mr. Chetan Anand has more than 30 years of experience in IT industry. He has worked for BAS Consultants at Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange for 4 years and 16 years at DHL USA. Later, he started his company, Newfound Systems, in 2009. Newfound Systems, they provide the following services: IT consulting, web development, business analytics, information management. I welcome Mr. Chetan, and I request him to start the session.
Okay. So I will be going over the entire JDBC from the inception of how exactly the JDBC actually works, and I will take you through the journey of the performance of JDBC and going through how the industry is actually looking at JDBC, and also the newer concept of involvement of JDBC. Okay. So stop me at any time if you have any questions. Okay. Now, the session topics are going to be introduction to database. It's purely introduction on the database. I won't be going much detail, and the JDBC. And I will be talking about some of the database vendors which are very light for development. And it's all open source. So one is SQLite, another one is H2 database. And I'm also going through the SQL CRUD operation. So CRUD means basically create, read, and update and delete. So in industry, people talk about CRUD as the process in SQL. And I'll be giving brief introduction on how to use logging mechanism. And also, I'll be talking about how to use connection pool using Hickory CP. And also, I'll be talking about how to use JPA and Spring JPA, because Spring is one of the hottest framework in Java web world. And I'll be introducing to database triggers and views. And also, I will show you how to use Google Guava Cache for looking up any static data. Okay, let's start. Now, as you know, that JDBC stands for it's Java Database Connectivity, and this is an API for executing queries across to the database server. Now, JDBC has got its own APIs for connecting to the database. Now, database always is vendor specific. So depending, when I say vendor specific, that means SQLite is one database vendor, Oracle is another one, SQL Server is another one, H2 is another one. So each one you will have separate drivers. Okay, so it is not one driver connecting to all. So you need to get the dependency jars, which I will be showing how to get all those dependency jars as per the database vendors. Okay, so each vendor will have their own JDBC drivers for client exchange of data. Now, when I was talking about API is actually application programming interface. So which in layman's term, it will be just some method or function to communicate with each other. Now, in this case, the communication is between the client and the server. The server is the database. The client could be a Java or a Python or C or whatever, whichever the language. So you will have to use the specification of the API to communicate with the server. Okay. So the popular databases are basically a lot of other. But it depends on the industries and the economy or the open source or the cost involvement. People go as per that. So one of that is an Oracle, Informix, MySQL, SQL Server, H2, and SQLite. Okay, as you can see this diagram, you have the Java API sitting this as a driver, and you have a Java application. which will be talking to the driver and which in turn will be talking to the database server. The database server can be sitting locally or across the TCP/IP network. So it depends on how you are going to communicate. Obviously, something which is sitting locally will be faster. Something which is sitting across the network or the TCP/IP, it will be some latency will be there. It depends on the infrastructure. Okay, is it clear? The next, what is a database? This is a brief introduction to the database. Database is an organized collection of tables. Now, each table is collection of columns. Now, if I have to give you some example, look at an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, let me open an Excel spreadsheet. Think this as one database. Each sheet is one table. So if you look at customer here, this is one table. And if you look at another one, let's say I rename this to country, this is another table. So each sheet will have its own number of columns and the number of rows. That's what I mean by here. Okay, so if you look at the example here, I have three sheets. One is the customer sheet, another one is the state, and another country, the sheet is country. So if you look at from the point of knowing how exactly each one, the data is logically organized in a row and column similar to spreadsheet. Okay, so this is just an introduction. Now looking at how the API you will be using, typically there will be four mainly people will be using. One is the select. Can you see the select here? Query is select. Select means basically you retrieving the data from the database. Manipulation, where you will be manipulating something on the server side. So one is insert, where you will be creating the data, and update, where you will be updating the existing data. Delete means basically you delete the existing data. Okay, so let me, any questions so far? Anybody, any questions before I move to the actual code? No questions? Okay, let me go over those statements which you will be using under the API. Now, each of these SQLs you will be going through for some kind of opening the database. First and foremost, you will open the database and you connect to the database, and subsequently you prepare a select statement. Now, if I give you some example of this, let me go over the actual application. Can you see this Java code?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah.
Okay. If you look at from the point, later I will explain each of these lines. Okay. Now, if you look at here, first and the foremost is getting a connection. Now, this connection, you will have to specify where the data is sitting. So if I go through the JDBC connection, you can actually see the JDBC. This is the URL, which shows that this is a local database using SQLite, and the database name is customer SQLite.db. Okay, and subsequently this guy will be used for creating the database. All these sources I will be posting over the GitHub so that you people can actually look at it, how exactly it works, and everything is a working code. So if you look at from here, this is how the database connectivity happens. Now, what does it mean here? you have to specify a JDBC URL. That means where are you connecting? Is the server sitting locally or is the server sitting across the network? So you need to know the IP address and what port you are connecting. So if you look at from, I will give you one which shows with the, can you see here? This is a typical TCP across. That means you are not connecting locally, you are going across the network to connect. Now, as you can see here, you will have to specify the username pertaining to the server connection and the password associated to that. Now, once you get the connection, your code will actually get that connection, and then you have to prepare a select statement. That means for getting the data. So I will come back to this code so that I can give you more details. Let me go over the slide first, okay? So there will be some kind of statement. So the statement is basically preparing the SQL statement which you will be executing. Once you execute, you will get some kind of result set. What we call technically it is the result set. The result set is nothing but the pointer to the rows which it has retrieved from the database. So in this case, if you go back here, the result set is nothing but a customer object. Can you see here? So you are getting a result set which you will have to iterate. That means from here to here, the system will iterate every single record which it has retrieved based on the condition which is email ID, that is email address. Okay. Now, if you go, just to give you some introduction on this, select is the SQL, customer ID is the column name, country code is also column name. All these are column names. That means ones which are defined in the database. And the table name is customer. And you have a condition where I want to retrieve all rows where the email ID is corresponding so to so and so. Okay. Is it clear? Is it clear? Can I go over the next one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let me go over this. So just to recap, every single SQL operation involves opening of the connection, preparing the statement. That means what is that you want to do, whether it is an update or a delete or an insert, whatever the SQL statement, and then subsequently you need to execute that. After you execute, you will get a result set. That result set is nothing but what I was talking about here. This, once you execute, you will get a result set. And that result set is a SQL, the JDBC API one. Now, if you look at here, this is what you get. rs.next means every time the pointer moves from one record to another record till it finds the last record from the whatever it has retrieved from the database. And remember, once you retrieve all this, the foremost important is to close all these resources. You have to close. No second thought at all. Before you do any SQL within the loop, first and the foremost is close the resources which are open. Now, in this case, the resources are result set, the statement, which is a prepare statement, and the connection. If you don't close the connection over a period of time, your database will crash because there will be some kind of resource memory leak of the number of connections, and subsequently it cannot handle any more connections and the server will crash. So always remember, once you start the code, first and the foremost is open the connection and close first. Don't even bother about actually putting all this code first. Okay, because I have seen many people where people tend to forget closing, and they will have a lot of problem in when they are analyzing web applications where they don't know where exactly the system is going wrong. It's very difficult. Okay. Now let me go over the next one. I'm just giving introduction to data types. So I believe that you people already have undergone the various data types as per the vendors. Now char, which is character, decimal is basically for all those numbers. Varchar is a variable char which has got limitation of, I think, depends on the vendor. Some will be like 255, another some will be like maximum 1024. So the extended version is the n varchar, and you have date time where you will specify the time as per till to the last second. And then you have the date, which will be purely YYYMMDD like that. And Boolean, which will be true or false. Integer, as number. Text means some database vendor allow you to define a data type called text, which will be used for storing some images, video clippings, basically, the media one. Okay. Now, all these I will be showing now from the how to create the database in SQLite. Now, SQLite, you can go into the SQLite.org and download the SQLite, which typically you will get it like this. If you go inside, once you get the SQLite, you just have to unzip those related ones, and then subsequently you go inside. Can you see here? So I'll go to SQLite tree, and I want to create a database. So can you see this? Now what this guy does is, if the customer-SQLite.db is already available, it will open the database. If not, it will create the database. So in our case, let's say I already opened, I already created, just use, it will open. So this is the most easiest database you can run within your server without going through any massive configuration or accessing on the network. This is a local one which will be sitting within your, let me show. If you look at here, the database is actually sitting in one of the folder. This is the database, customer SQLite.db. Clear? Then now you want to create the table, or you can use .help. It will show you all kinds of command associated to the SQLite. So in this case, I want to know the existing tables which are there. So I can just type in .schema. I will get all the tables available within this database. So if I want any table data, so I can just use select star from customer. This will give you the customer data. So basically, this is a very light one, and it is perfectly works, and I have executed the millions of transactions in this, and it perfectly works. So you don't have to worry about too much of configuration. Okay, is it clear? Now,
yes, sir.
Okay, so if you don't want the command line operation, there is a tool called DB Visualizer. You can download the tool DB Visualizer, which I have given the URL at the end of the presentation. If you go through that, this is a universal database browser. So you can actually, if you look at here, I have configured several database vendors in one tool. So if you look at SQLite, I have the SQLite here. I just connect. So when you are connecting, as you can see here, the database is sitting in a folder. Can you see here? This is the folder. And SQLite database don't have any user ID and password. You can just connect because it's local. So I will just reconnect. And once you reconnect, you can see all those tables, country, customer, customer audit, which I'll show you how to do all that stuff. So when you go into country, just double click on country. You can see the schema and you can see the data. Clear? And you can see all kinds of, primary key, index, whatever created as per the table. Is it clear? Let me go the next one. Now, how do you create the table? When you want to create the table, I have given the SQL in the presentation. You just have to copy paste this portion like what I'm showing here. Create table, create table, all this, and then subsequently just put a semicolon at the end. It will create the database table. Now, after that, you can just use select star from customer where you can get the data. And like I showed you, dot schema will list all the schema associated to the table. So you can download this from SQLite.org, download.html, and then subsequently it will give you a zip file, and you can unzip and put it in whichever the folder, and you can start the database creation and subsequently create the tables. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, any questions? Anybody? Throw me questions, so it will be easier. I will know that how well I'm communicating and actually making the concepts going across.
Students, you have any questions with respect to JDBC? So you can move on to the next one. Probably they will have doubts later, I guess. They will later ask the questions, I guess.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go over the next one. Now, this is all the theory concepts which I'm going to give you. So when you are connecting anything to any database, primarily you need the JDBC URL first, where you are connecting, and the corresponding username and the password. And if you look at typical the URL, first it will always starts with JDBC, and it follows by the associated vendor. So in this case, if I'm connecting to Microsoft SQL Server, it will be SQL Server. And I was talking about the SQLite, that will come in as SQLite. If it is an Oracle, it will come in as Oracle. And then subsequently, you need to specify where it is sitting, which IP address. If it is a local, so it will be local, or you can specify 127.0.0.1 like that. And then you will end up with a port that you need to know which port you need to connect to. Some database vendors has default ports. That means when you create the instance of the database, it will have a default port to connect to unless you change. So for a SQL Server, the default port is 1433, and then followed by the database and whatever the security you want to analyze and put it. So this is all this property and the value depends on the vendor. That means each vendor can have its own properties. So if it is a SQL Server, they'll have its own properties. So let me show you one of the property for another database vendor, so you'll understand what exactly it is. Now, if I go through an IBM database, which is Informatics. Now, if you look at here, you have the JDBC, which always starts. and followed by the database vendor, which is Informix SQLite, and the server name, it is localhost, and this is the port number 9088, and this is the database name, and you have a server name, and this is the database name, and you want to have the DB date. That means what the date format you want, which is DDMMYYY4 wise with a delimiter as slash. So you can also specify, no, I don't want slash, I want hyphen. So you can put hyphen here. So whenever you query any data from a data type, you will get the date in hyphen. If not, you will get it whatever. Next one is client local UTF-8. Now, what does it mean? Some of the database you need to create for English and non-English, which will be double byte for, like, let's say Kannada or Hindi or Japanese or Chinese. They are double bytes. So you need to, these are all vendor specific. These are all the properties. So I was talking about the property, right? So Informix server is one property, database is another property, and DB date is one property, client local is another property as for Informix. Okay, when it comes to SQL Server, it could be slightly different. So it could be like, you see this one, database to upper equals false. So all these properties goes as per the database vendor. You need to go and log in to the specific database website, and there they will specify what are all the properties allowed and why you need to configure for what purpose. Okay, so each of these, and once you do this, so let me go over, just do a connect here, it'll connect. That's it. Very, very straightforward. And then you can browse through all the databases which are sitting here, and subsequently you can get all those tables. Clear? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let me go over the next one. This is how the connecting to the database. So like I told you, you need to do the connection and finally close. Now, let me go over the actual action in the Eclipse one. So if you go over here, typically you will specify a separate class for all the connection related. Don't embed all the connection related in every single code, because you are actually duplicating a lot of work, which in turn you will end up doing a lot of maintenance. Now, what I have done is I have created a simple DB manager where the connection happens. So anybody who wants a connection, they need to just call this connection. And this particular one, static this will be executed when the application runs, and it will read the, can you see this JDBC SQL.properties? So I have the JDBC.driver class name. The driver class name, you should go as per the database vendor. So it will be all SQLite.jdbc in this case. And the URL is JDBC SQLite database, which is a folder, because SQLite works on the folder. And then the actual database name. And for SQLite, you don't have the username and the password. Now, if you go back here, this one will get loaded in a property file, which will be available to the class. Can you see here? The system executes here. I will show you how it executes. I'm just giving example here. Now, this particular one will actually read that file from the specific config folder. So if you look here, can you see? This one is actually pointing to config/jdbc-SQLite.properties. So this one is available in the config folder, as you can see here. Now this will be loaded, and subsequently the properties will be available to whichever the client who is asking for connection. So if I go to customer query, now the first and the foremost, I am getting a connection. Can you see here, which is exactly same. So if you click F3 in Eclipse, it will go to this and it is getting the connection, and there is an auto commit. Now, auto commit, by default, certain vendors will allow you as auto commit. What happens is, what do you mean by auto commit? If you are doing any insert or update or delete, you don't have to commit the transaction. As soon as the SQL is the update or delete or insert SQL is executed, it will commit as long as the SQL goes through. Certain transaction, if you are doing like adding depositing a transaction, withdrawing or transferring some amount from one account to another account, you want to make sure that this is 1 minus 1 plus and everything both happens correctly. Only then you want to commit the transaction, otherwise you will end up as data integrity problem. So I have given this option, which you can always go through what are all the. So if you type in con dot, you can. There are so many things are there. You can do whatever. So many stuffs are available for setter and getter, and you can do all that with the connection. Okay, just type in con dot, and you will get all the methods associated to the class. Okay. Now let me go over the actual application. So customer query. So we are getting a connection here, as you can see here. And subsequently, I'm getting this is the SQL statement. Now I'm preparing the statement, which is this SQL, and I'm setting the parameters. So there is one parameter. The parameters are indicated by question mark. You can see here. So if there are 3 question marks, so that means you will have to do it as set string 1, set string 2, set string 3, or depending on the data type. It could be a long or a date or anything. So you will end up, so let's say you want to do it based on country. So I will specify country equals question mark. And now in this case, I need to put a country because otherwise it will give error. So I can specify here country, I'll hard code IN. Now in this case, the first question mark goes here. This is parameter 1. This is parameter 2. So you have an IN and an email, and if the code, the email address which you are asking exists, it will execute. Okay, let me execute and then I will go over this entire the loop, what exactly it does. Okay, let me run over. You can see here, it is reading the customer by email kumar.r@somewhere.com, and it is reading the property file config.jdbc-SQLite.properties, which is actually happening in the DB manager. And then it is getting the connection, which is the database connection. It got the connection, and this is the reference to the connection. This is just a reference. And then subsequently, it is getting the data as per the whatever the column you are asking for, and then it is disconnecting. Here is what it is disconnecting. Now these are all the typical traditional one. As we move along, I will show you how actually it evolved for faster execution. Now if you look at here, this while loop will go through for every single record which it has retrieved from the database. And this is the customer object. As you can see here, this is a customer object, because whatever the data you are receiving from the result set, you need to put it to a Java object so that you can actually do something more than that. Maybe you want to display over the web, or you want to send an email, or you want to generate an invoice, like that. Now, if you look at here, the RS will give you a pointers to each of the column available within the record. Now, if you want customer ID is a long, if you go back here, let me go over here. If you look at the customer, You have an integer, character, text, varchar, like that. So depending on the data type, you need to use the appropriate methods. So this is a long. Next one is a country, which is a string. The customer name, which is also a string, and email address. Now, if you look at this is what we call in the industry as boilerplate code, because if just imagine if you have 100 columns, getting all those 100 columns within a loop whole day you will be spending. Okay, and if there are, let's say someone else added 10 more columns, now you need to go and put these 10 more columns here, or you can also use star. But even if you use just like this, if you use star, that means all the columns. It doesn't mean that the data will be available. That means all the columns will be available to the end user. No, you have to do again get like that. Those 5 more columns you have to use get. So these are all pretty boilerplate code. That means basically you need to put all these as a norm to get the data, and each time it will run through that, and subsequently you need to close. That's what it works. Any questions? Questions on this query?
No, sir.
No? Okay. So let's go over the next one. Now, query all is exactly the same, where you are not specifying any where clause, where condition. Everything else is exactly same. Clear? Now, let me go back to the slide. So this is what I was talking about, getting the connection, querying, and then subsequently you close. So I will go over the next one slide, which is actually insert. How do you do the insertion? As you can see here, you need to get the connection, then you need to specify an insert SQL, insert into customer, because the table name is customer, and what are all the columns. You pretty much you will end up putting all the columns, and you will have to specify question marks for placeholders. That means this question mark, the first question mark here goes to country code. The next question mark goes to customer name. So in the same sequence. So you will have to specify one which goes here, which in turn goes to the country code. Like that, you will have to specify every single columns which you are going to insert into the database. And whenever you do any delete or update or insert, the JDBC API is going to give you just number. That means if it has updated, it will tell you, okay, 0 or 1 or how many number of rows affected. So in this case, you need to let the client know that it has inserted. So what we do is, whenever the int that rows updated is greater than 0, that means it was a successful insert. So we just have to set the boolean as success. This is just a synopsis of the actual code. I will show you from the application how it works. Okay, going back here, I go over to add. As you can see here, it's exactly same code. You have the country code, which is correspond to this question mark, and which in turn question mark is replaced by 1 here. So this one goes here and this one goes to country code. Like that, you need to specify all that, and once the data is updated, it will return you the number of rows updated greater than 0, which in turn will set the boolean, because the rows updated is greater than 0, it will be success. Then you run all that. Let me run. Can you see here? Adding customer success true. You can see whether this data is uploaded or not. Go to your DB visualizer. Go to customer. You can see here it got updated. John Howard, john.hr@somewhere.com. So the same thing, you can also do the select statement here. Select star. Initially, try doing the SQL statement by yourself, because if you go through the DB visualizer, you may forget the actual SQL. So you can type in where you know exactly what. So it will give you all this. Once you are familiar with the SQL statements, you can go through the typical browser for browsing the data. Which one? This is a DB visualize. Okay. Now, this is the way you need to insert the data. Now, if you look at here, there is one nice one which is current timestamp. What exactly happens is you want to do the last insertion time and the last modified time. You can actually, you don't have to set it as new date. You can just use the database server. So this one will go as per the server name. That means if you are writing an application and let's say the server is sitting in Singapore. Now, when you insert, the system will take now, which is in India, plus 2 hours, 30 minutes. That will be the time of insertion there. Okay. So normally when we persist to the database, we maintain only one GMT, because we can't be doing that. If somebody from India we insert as per India time. If somebody inserts from, let's say, Japan to Singapore server, we cannot put Japanese GMT, because that way it will be very confusing. So we put everything as per Singapore. But if India retrieves the data, we will show the time as per India. If Japanese guy retrieves the same data, we will show as per the Japanese time zone, because we just add or minus GMTs. That's how it is actually done. Okay. Now, let's go over to how to do update. Update is also very similar. You get the connection. Only thing, the SQL statement in this case will be update. Update what? Update the customer. What is that you want to update? I want to update the phone number. See, sometimes you may not want to update every single row or every single column. So depending on what you want, you can update only that column. So in this case, I'm updating phone number and last modify. So just for audit's sake, that what time it was updated. And then you prepare the statement. And as usual, you will have to set the string 1 and 2, because the first string is this guy. Okay. So second string is the email. Now, once you run that, it will show you how many rows updated. I can just show you, let's put it here. Rows updated. Now we run. Number of rows updated is 1. And what is that we updated? We updated to 5566778899. So go back to your DB visualizer. Now, what was before? It was 2233445566. Now you just refresh. Now this time it will be 5566778899. So this is how you do the database updates. Okay. So you will do exactly the same as getting the connection, prepare the statement. Only thing this time, the SQL which you will be using will be updated. And this will be the table name, and these are all the columns, and you will specify all those parameters which you will set it up here. Okay? Is clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next one will be delete. So delete is the same like update. The only thing is you will be using the delete. So what is that you want to delete? You want to delete the customer with an email ID so and so. Okay. Now you will have to use the delete customer where email ID is so and so, and it will still give you the number of rows updated, and then you just execute. So let me go over. I will delete this person. It's deleted. Now, if you go back to the DB visualizer, this is gone. Okay. Now, when you are writing in the corporate world, typically people don't just delete like that. They will make it inactive, so that there will be an audit of what was the reason for making it as inactive. So delete, though it may sound like, okay, I deleted the customer. Typically people don't do delete when it is a customer, master data management. So they will just make it inactive. Okay. Is it clear? So that's what we covered under CUD process. Create, which will be insert, R, which will be purely select, U, which will be update, D, which will be delete. So we went through the insert. It is available in the slide, and this slide will be available in the GitHub. So you can always refer this presentation. And okay, we went through the update. We went through the delete. And remember, never ever don't, if you don't remember to close, it will be problematic. And I have also seen many code where whoever opens the connection, it is their responsibility to close, not someone else. Typically, sometimes I have seen the code where a method is opening. That means, I'll show you. See, if you look at here, SQL, this is the method which is opening the connection, right? Sometimes what they do is, this method will open the connection, and somewhere else they will get a reference to that connection, and then they close it. No, that will be very difficult from the point of maintenance of the code, because you don't know which one is, who is opening and who is closing. The rule of thumb is very simple. If you open in that method, it is your responsibility to close. Okay. So that way your code will be neat, and also the maintenance will be perfect. And you yourself, looking at the code after 6 months or 1 year, 2 years, you should still remember what it is doing. Okay. So, and always remember, put the coding naming standard perfect. Don't put, I've seen many code where they use just like, I'll tell you what, they just use CCD, CN. CCD means what? Country code. CN, you are not making the code readable. You have to make the code readable. So if you look at from the customer object, look at this customer object. Give a proper name, so somebody looking at the code, they actually know what is the data behind that property. So country code, I don't have to explain. Customer name, I don't have to explain. None of this I need to explain. Everything is very clear, just to understanding what is the data behind. And always use the same naming convention as per your database. Then it will be easier to remember. Some people will use their own naming convention in the Java object, which makes it life very complex when you are correlating the table to the Java object, because you don't know what is what, right? Because CCD could be anything, right? It can be country code, or it could be some consignee code also. How? We don't know. So it's better to have one-to-one. If you are using here as country code, you might as well put it here also as a country code. It will be easier for maintenance. Clear? Next. Any questions so far? How the things? Sneha madam, how is going on? Is okay?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine, sir. I think we can move on to the next framework.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going to introduce something called database transaction. Now, what do you mean by transaction? Database transaction is a unit of work performed within a database management system against a dataset. What do you mean by that? Meaning, in a single logical one, you want to do an insert. In this case, I'm adding a customer and updating the same customer with something. So I can do. So if you look at, let's say, banking transaction, you want to transfer some money to someone else. So basically, two transactions are happening. That means two SQLs. One is it is deducting some amount from your account and subsequently it has to add to another account. So both these two should, in one single transaction, if both these SQLs perform, only then you need to commit the transaction. So in this case, that is where we call it as single database transaction. You remember I was talking about auto commit. So in this case, I made the auto commit as false, meaning I want to update and commit the transaction only when everything is correct. If due to some reason, let's say this update failed, okay? Now, if you make that auto commit to true, you know what will happen? Your ad will go through perfectly well. It has already persisted to the database as insert and your update has gone for a toss. Now, in this case, you will have a data integrity problem. So, in most of the application, you will never have an auto commit true at all. It will be always false unless you are doing a single insert or a single update or a single delete. Then you don't need transaction, because if that single transaction fail, then fail. That's it. There is nothing data integrity problem at all. But if you are using multiple DML, that is data manipulation, which could be insert or an update or a delete, all these three should go through. If not, you roll back the transaction. Okay, that's what I mean database transaction. So let me go over. Actually, you can see here, I have given con commit. So that means if everything, the success is true, then it execute this particular line, only then commit the transaction. If not, you do the rollback. That means if something has gone wrong in the update, your ad will be rolled back. Clear, huh? So let me go over with the application. I go back to Eclipse, transaction. Now, how do you do the transaction? It's very simple. When you do a connection, okay, let me show you from the beginning. So do transaction. This is from the main. I'm getting a connection this time. I'm making auto commit false. So previously I would have made the commit true. So in this case, this guy will be false. When it gets the connection, this guy will be false. So that means when everything happens for good, then only you commit the transaction, not before that. Okay, that's the meaning. So if you look at here, I'm inserting a table row, which is a customer. I'm passing the connection object to the ad, and I'm also passing the record which I want to insert into the database, which is customer. Once it is successful, only then I will do an update, which is here. Okay, for exactly the same user. This is just an example. Huh? So, and then once the update is successful, then I do the commit here. If it is not successful, I roll back, and then I connect the. I will close the connection. So, and then the program close. So let me run this. You can see here, updating the customer phone number by so and so. It has done the adding. Now, if we go back to the DB visualizer, you can actually see it has insert a Trevor Smith, and then subsequently it updated the phone number, which is 1-800 call help. If you go back to the application, the first time The phone number was 88998899. Then subsequently I updated. If something goes wrong, then it will not even insert this data at all. Clear? Huh? Okay, so most of you will end up doing database transaction only, because it's very rare people don't do without transaction. You will have a transaction. So the only thing is, when you're getting the connection, you set the method auto commit to false. Once you do auto commit to false, it expects you to commit. Let's say you forgot this. Okay, by default it will roll back. You have to commit. Even if you don't call the rollback, when you close the database connection, it will roll back. Most vendors will roll back unless you specify, I want to commit the transaction. Clear? So this is how you do the typical database transaction. Any questions? Come on, I need questions, so that I know that how well you people are actually grasping. Come on, question. No question. It has to be. There has to be some questions.
Students, you have any questions? So this is the time that you can ask questions and get your doubts clarified. You have anything, I think we can move.
Okay. Okay, sure. Now, all these, let me go over the slide. Next thing, I'm going to introduce you something called database connection pool. Now, what does that mean? When you do a typical, so far, whatever you have gone through, it is a single connection. That means every time it has to go across to the database, open the TCP socket, read the data over the socket, and subsequently close the connection and closing the socket. So if you are running just one insert, update and all, you don't really know in terms of the performance. But if you are doing a typical database related web web application, there will be thousands of customers going in and doing all kinds of transaction and coming out. Now you can't afford every time to open the connection like that. See, though it may take, if you look at typical connection, it may take 200 milliseconds. You don't care. 200 milliseconds is nothing. It's not even 1/4 of a second. So you'll be fine. But when you are running with several million transactions across the network and so many people accessing, you cannot afford. So you will have to go through a connection pool. Now, what do you mean by connection pool? Connection pool is a cache of database connection objects, meaning you would have already connected, let's say you would have got 10 physical connection to the database. And subsequently, when you ask for connection, it will give you from the pool. So it is not actually opening every time to the physical server under. It is already connected. So you are just taking a leaf out of the pool and putting it back. That's all. So I will show you the performance of when you do a typical database transaction and the one you do through the connection pool. It's tremendous difference. Okay. So the database pool is nothing but you will have a cache of database connection object which you will be using. So if you look at from the diagram here, thread 1, thread 1, thread 1, thread 1, that means user, just say some user. So they will get the connection from the pool, which in turn already has the connection to the database. And subsequently, when you close, you are actually getting it, you're opening it back into the pool. And once the application exits, then it will be disconnecting. That one you don't have to. Typically, the web application will actually do that. So there is a fast and light connection pool, which is called Hickory CP. Let me show you how the Hickory CPU works. If you go through here, the normal JDBC and the connection pool looks more or less same. There's not much of a difference. The only thing is you will have to specify how many, in this case, the APIs will be different. Huh? So you will have to specify how many connections you want to keep it open. Let's say 20 or 25. And then subsequently, you will get the connection from the data source here. And then you disconnect. Apart from this, everything else is exactly same. Let me go over the actual application to show you. And here I'm going to use Hickory CP, which is the industry wise, it is very fast and a lot of people use this for web applications. Hickory CP, okay? And you can download the Hickory CP from the URL, which I'll show you at the end of the presentation. So let me go over here using connection pool. Now, look at this. I'm going to show you first our same old the query, how long it takes, and I'm going to query different countries using exactly one each time a connection and see how it works. And in here, I'm using a different database vendor because SQLite don't allow connection pool. So there is another database which I'm going to use, which is called H2. Okay, so H2 is another database where you can do it something similar to SQLite. The only thing you can have connection pool and you can also access the database across the network. Okay, let me run this and I'll show you. If you look at this, maybe from the development point, you don't really care. Oh, 160 millisecond, who cares? That's fine. 149, okay. 208, okay. 223, most of these are less than 1/4 of a second. So you're fine. But when you are using in a web application, anything which is taking 200, 300 milliseconds for just a single record, it is way too slow. Way too slow. You should be getting, I will show you how in the connection pool you get exactly same code. If you look at here, there's not much difference. You are still getting all these and you are doing a search. When you do a search, you are getting the connection, selecting based on the country, and then subsequently you are getting. Now, if you look at with the connection pool, see what happens. Can you see the difference? So the earlier one was like 200, 250 milliseconds. This one is 5 milliseconds. You can see here, first time it takes because it is creating the connection pool. Subsequently, you will see the difference. Look at that. This is 7 milliseconds. Where is 7 and where is 200? Okay, that is how so moving forward, most of us will end up writing, for typical JDBC, one with the connection pool, and also moving forward, I will introduce JPA. Okay, so if you look at here, the performance is way too good. Now, how does it actually work? So let me go over that. Now, this is the way you set up the connection pool, which is a cache of database connection objects. So you will specify still the same URL. You will still specify the username. You will also specify the same password. Only thing here, you will specify some pool size. What should be the initial pool size means maximum you want like 25. So initial size may be 5 only. And then autocommit false. And this guy will give you a Hickory data source. Now you have to use the Hickory data source to get the connection. That's all, very simple. So if you look at here, data source, can you see here? you are getting a HDS, and then subsequently you are just getting the connection from the pool. Absolutely, exactly, more or less same. The only difference is you are getting the connection pool, you are getting the database connection from the pool. All others, you are doing exactly the same. Clear? Is it clear? Can you see the difference? So far, okay?
Yes, sir. No question.
No question. Okay, let's go with the next one. So this is how you do the database connection pool, and we are using a standard connection pool which is called Hickory CP. So if you Google Hickory CP, you will get the related jars, and that is how you specify. Okay. Next one. Now there are three popular connection pools. Hickory CP is the most preferred, lightweight, and very fast. So you may not see that much of difference between Apache Commons DBCP and Hickory CP, but people tend to use Hickory CP because it is slightly faster than the DBCP one. It's preference, but more or less all three will give you the same. Okay. Next Q&A. So we are skipping Q&A. Next one. I'm going to introduce you something called object to relation mapping. Now, what does that mean? Whenever object means it is the Java object, relation means the relational table. So when you are getting the data from the table to the Java object, you have to do lot of boilerplate, meaning if you have 100 columns in the customer table, you will have to write 100 times this guy. Customer set something, customer set like that. So tomorrow, if someone else go and add 10 more columns, you have to go and put it into your code to do setter, which is very cumbersome. So moving forward, I will introduce you something called Apache DBUtils. Now, what does it do? It can actually do a mapping of the table to the Java object, and all these can be done in a couple of lines of code. Let me show you. If you look at the typical query, now this is a customer object. In Java world, we also call it as POJO. POJO means plain old Java object, where there will be no getter, there will be no business logic, just the normal properties with getter and setter. If you look at here, customer is an object, and you have many columns. You look here, so these are all many columns. Now, these are all it should be directly related to the relational table, so that it will be easily do the DBUtils mapping. If you do here just CCD and there you put country underscore CD, then the mapping will not be, it won't happen. It has to be exactly the same so that it knows how to do that. Then, this is the customer object, and if you look at from the customer query, it looks very neat. As you can see here, there is a country and star. So today you have only 3 columns in country object. So tomorrow you may add 10 more. You just need to add those 10 more into the country object. So in this case, country object is here. You have country ID, country code, and country name. And then what the application will do is, there's something called being list handler. What it does is, this is, you can do a Google and check how to use Apache DBUtils. and you can do the customer or the country is a bean. So the query you are handling, you need to map to an object which is country. Correct? Because these are all the columns which you are getting it from the country table, and you need to map it. This handler should know what is the object which it has to do the mapping. Now, in this case, I run the query. You look at the code. Your code looks very clean and neat. You are running the query, specifying this is the API. Okay, query is the API. Con, these are all the parameters which you need to send it to the method. So you send the connection object. SQL, the SQL will be select star from country, where country code is so and so, and the object. And once you specify this is nothing but your country code is actually replacing this question mark. Okay, this country code is replacing the question mark. And then once it executes the query, you don't know whether it will be one or more. So it will be n number of countries depending on the country code, whatever. Now, in this case, you will get a list of country objects. Okay, from the same query, you will get the list of country objects. Now, the beauty portion of this is tomorrow, if you add few more columns, you don't have to change this code at all. It will still work perfectly well. All you need to do is just add those columns in the country table. This one, this object. Okay, if I remove this, okay, I will show you how it runs. Then I'll remove this, see what happens. Okay, let me show you. Now once you get the list of countries, you are just iterating and just displaying. So let me show you. Run. You're getting all this, right? Can you see here? Country ID, country code, country name. Suppose you don't want somebody, don't want to show the country ID because it doesn't make any sense. So I guess to go and remove that. So what I do is, I go to country object. I just comment this. Okay. Once I comment, I run this code. This time, there won't be any country ID. Can you see here? Because there is no mapping of the column. You see that physically that column exists in the table, but you are ignoring that in the Java object. So meaning, though you are getting that column, you are not mapping to the country property, which is country ID. So that's why it doesn't show. If once I put back, it will be perfect. Now run the code. This time it comes back. Okay. So unfortunately or fortunately, there will be some code where people would be using the old style of getter, setter, and all that stuff. So you will still end up. So if you happen to maintain any code in your career, if possible, you can always change that code with the, of course, with the project management. And this is very easy to maintain. Look at the code. You don't have to really worry about the code execution because this is a standard. You cannot go wrong in this at all because you will have to specify the whichever the object which is directly mapped to the country table. And then subsequently, once you get the list, you run through that and display. That's what I mean. Apache DB utils is a third-party JDBC wrapper utils, which will give you a lot of stuff. So you can use the update, insert, all sort of things. If you go to this API, you will see all that. Okay. So this is what I mean. The object relation mapping using Apache DB utils. So typically you don't have to use, look at the code. You don't have to use prepare statement. You don't have to use result set. You don't have to use the while. Nothing of that sort. Look at this. The code will be very neat. Compared to this, as the number of columns increase, your number of lines also increase here. Whereas in this case, it is not going to increase at all. It will be exactly same. Got it? So this is what is called object relational mapping, and using a third-party API, which is Apache DB utils. And these utils are there since probably like 10-15 years. Perfectly works. Okay. Next one. Any questions before I move to the new world, which is JPA? Any questions?
No, sir.
How many of you know anything about build tools? Anybody? How do you compile a program in Eclipse? How do you compile? Any of you are compiled? Have you heard of any tool called Maven? The name is this guy, Maven. Have you heard of this? Maven, any of this buzzword? Anybody? Okay, let me tell you, Maven is a build tool. So there are many build tools available in the Java world. One is Ant, another neat tool, which will be XML based configuration. The next one is Maven, which is, I think, 95% uses Maven tool. The another one, which is promoted by Google, is called Gradle. Okay, we use in all our applications and Maven, because newer applications we will use Maven only. The older application, unfortunately, it's still there. We will use Ant. This is the dependency based tool. Let me show you what does it mean before I move to the next one. If you look at, this is the build tool. If you go to apache.maven.org, this guy, if you go into Apache.Maven, you will see all kinds of things, how to do Maven projects. So this is a dependency based. Now what does it mean? Every single project in Java, there will be some dependency. So if you look at from the SQLite, the dependency of SQLite, you need to specify the jar, which jar you need to JDBC jar. So there is a dependency. If you are using a H2, there will be another dependency. If you are using DB utils, there is another dependency. So all these dependencies are perfectly managed within the POM. So you can go, I'm not going to the very deep details about the POM and the Maven, but just be aware that there is something called Maven, which will be used in the Java world for building any application. Now what it does, all kinds of dependencies you can specify, and subsequently you build, and it will create a executable object, which is an executable jar. Maven build, see what happens. So it will manage all those dot classes. That means your source will be .java, whereas your compiled one will be .class. That will be available under target. If you look here, this will be under target, all the classes. So I go and let's say I just delete. See, all those targets will get created again. Okay, these are all the dot classes, compiled one. So let me go over. Okay, now I go and build again. The Google Gradle is similar, it's just another way of building the tool. So now it is compiling all the 18 objects, and then it is putting it under target classes. and then it is creating an executable jar, which is here under target. So if you go back to the Explorer, you can see all these here. So when you are deploying into the production, you can just take this jar file right down to the production and put the jar file and run the application. It will work perfectly to work. And it also has all the dependencies, everything will be available to you in the Maven. So typically you have to use Maven or a Gradle, but Maven is very easy to use. Gradle is a newer one. Okay, so you will find a lot of information on how to use Maven in Stack Overflow or any other websites. Okay, clear? Now, before I move over to JPA, I also will briefly touch what. Have you noticed something here? Let me CP. Did you notice something here? Logger. Now, logger, you need to use logging mechanism in any of your program. It is a must. Without logging, there is no way you can actually debug a code. So let's say you deployed the production. Somebody says that, there is an error. How do you find where the error is and how the trace of your code? So if you use a logger, it will show you exactly wherever you put logger info or logger debug, you can use a lot of stuff. So you can use logger debug, logger trace. So you also have trace. You also have fatal, where when there is a fatal error message, you can put fatal, or you can also use error. All these, it is available, and these are all configured. If you go to the Apache Log4j 2, this is the way you need to configure a Log4j. So it will show you that log to console. You can see that. I don't want to go into very detail because it will take time. So in a login mechanism, when you run the code, see what happens. If you use a normal system, let me show you. A lot of people use just system and all. See what happens. If you use system, there is nothing wrong, but there's no way you can debug what is happening. Now, when you run this code, look at this. I am getting a country somewhere. It will be putting country here, right? Okay. What do I know? You are just checking from the application. You don't even know which line this got executed. You have to start running around where this particular system.out is there. But if you use a logger, you see, I knock off this. I use a logger. It will show you exactly can you see here? This is the class which it is running. This is the method it is executing, and this is the message you are displaying. So you know exactly where your execution actually happening. So if you look at here, country cp.java 46, you can click on the 46, it will show you exactly same what it is doing. Come on. Line number 46. Can you see here? Exactly same. So using logger, let's say some people, they want to trace only when it is a fatal or an info. You can actually specify in the logger jar whether you want what level. So if you put it as only I want fatal. Now what happens is if you put it like this, it will only log when there is a fatal. Otherwise it won't log. Just I'll show you. I put it fatal here. I go back to the code. I run the code. What happened? You see, did you show anything? Nothing, because your logger level is fatal. Only when there is a fatal, only it will display. Otherwise, it won't show at all. So you can control all these in logger, log4j. So now I put back info. I run exactly the same code. Now this time it will show. Okay, that is how you control the log4j to, and you will have to use, because it will be very useful from the debugging point and the code also. Somebody looking at the code, they don't have to jump around everywhere to see which line number this is getting executed. It will actually show you which line, and you can go and click on that, and then it's very easy. Okay, that is the log4j. Clear? So we touch based on the log4j and also the POM. So for more details, you can go into the Maven project and you can see how the Maven, the structure actually happens. This is an XML, the POM is an XML style, as you can see here. So there will be dependencies, as you can see here. And this is the project. And this is, you can specify all kinds of the properties where it will do the build. Okay, let's go over to any questions from anybody. Any questions? Come on. There has to be questions. I can't. They have to be, some doubts you should have by this time.
Maybe at the end they will ask, probably.
Okay, sure. Then
Yeah.
we will continue Q&A at the end.
Yeah.
Let me go over something called JPA. What is JPA? It is a Java Persistence API. This thing uses the plain old Java, and you can see the number of code. The code, typically you write hundreds of lines for getting a data. Using JPA, you can actually get it in, you won't believe, 2-3 lines. Okay, so let me go over. So using JPA, so we are not going in much detail. I'm just introducing that what is a JPA and how it will be used in entity management. So entity classes are nothing but a normal, let me show you entity class, then it will be very easy for you to understand. So if you look at customer model, if you look at this, okay, this is a normal customer object. You just need to turn this to an entity class. That means this customer object should know that which entity it is directly mapped. And using some JPA API, you can actually get the data. Let me go over here. If you look here, in our example, a Java bean is a Pojo. So in our case, a customer.java is a Pojo, country.java is a Pojo, which can be converted to the entity class for object relation mapping. Now, what does it mean? If you look at here, in the JPA world, you just had to create an entity bean class, meaning you just have to specify the annotation. This is an entity class, and this is the table it is directly mapped, and these are all the objects which are there in the table. And once you do this, you don't just look at the code. Your code is only 3 lines or 2 lines. Can you see this line? This one. This one, I'm using something called Spring Framework. You can actually go through that. Using Spring JPA, you can actually see all that. So this is directly mapped a country object, and the system, you just need to specify the select statement, and then it is, once you use a JPA, it actually fetches the data directly into the country object, depending on whether it is a list of country or only a single country. That is how the JPA with Spring Boot. Okay. Of course, this is not, it's just an introduction so that you people are aware moving forward that there is a JPA where you can use an entity class and you can specify a query object, and then subsequently it will fill. This is how you do that. Clear? So in this case, country is an object, whereas you are getting only one country, so there can be only one country, so that's why you are getting a single object. Whereas in country, all countries, then it will be list of countries, find all. That is how it is used in the JPA. So most of the enterprise class web applications using Java will use Spring Boot. Okay, that is the number one web framework for all the Java-based enterprise applications. We use very extensively for all our customers. Now, this is the traditional JDBC transaction, which I have already covered, where you need to do the auto commit and all that stuff. Now, if you use in the JPA world, this is just an introduction, so you don't have to digest all these in a single session. This is just in the sorry, in the JPA world, everything is done through annotations. So it will go through transaction and all. That's how it does. Maybe one of these days, when you have time, just go through what is Spring JPA transaction. You will get to know. Okay. Now, in this case, what exactly is happening is, if something goes wrong, it will automatically does a rollback for you. You don't have to do anything. Okay. You don't have to begin transaction. You don't have to commit transaction. Everything it handles by the JPA. This is the Java Persistence API, which is part of the JDK standard. Okay. Next is, I'm going to introduce something called trigger. Now, what do you mean by trigger? A database trigger is a procedural code that is automatically executed in response to certain events or the view in a database. Now, what does it mean that? When you do an insert, that is an insert trigger. So you can actually, run, maybe whenever you insert something, you need to send an SMS or you need to update something into another table, you can do that. Whenever you do an update on the table or update on a column, you can trigger something action, some other action. Okay, so the action can be a normal SQL or a store procedure. So let me go over what does it mean in terms of the trigger, how it works. Can you see here? Customer. Let me update something, customer. So I have created a table called customer audit. Okay. Now, if you look at from the application, I have created a trigger which is under schema. This, I have two triggers. One is before update, another one is before delete. That means before you make any changes to the data, I will insert a before image. The after image will be there in the live one. Before image will be updated into the customer audit. Now, what I will do is, look at this Trevor Smith, okay? Or let me check which one I can update so that you know how exactly it works. Now, the John HR, what is the data there? 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 6, 6, something like that, right? Now, here I go and update to 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9, 9. See what happens. Okay, it updated. Now what is the data sitting now? It is 5566778889. What was it before? Some 2222 something like that. Now if you go to the audit, action, can you see here? The system would have inserted what is the actual one. So if I go and this guy takes a before image of prior to the update and insert into the audit table. So that is what is trigger, and this is what is happening here. So create trigger, update customer, before update on customer. That means whenever there is any update on the customer, you insert. This could be one SQL, or it could be multiple SQL, or it could be a store procedure. That means execute series of some action. You can do that. You can put the trigger based on the table row update, or if you update a specific column. If somebody go and update, let's say a phone number or an email, you can trigger only based on when there is an update on an email or a phone. The same way, whenever you go and delete, you can insert into the customer audit table. This audit table, you can specify whatever the table you want. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So in this case, what I have done is, I have created exactly this replica of the same customer table. This is exactly the same. Okay, the only thing is, I have added an additional, which is a sequence 8943, that customer audit ID, and everything else is exactly same. Okay, if you double click here, it's exactly the same. From here all the way here is exactly the same as what is in the live record. Okay, so you will have to use some kind of trigger, and I have, at the end of the presentation, I have the URL where the triggers will be discussed more in details. Okay, so you have a delete trigger, and you have an update trigger, and you can have a insert trigger. Clear? Okay. Old means before image, new means after image. That means after it has updated. In our case, we are taking before update. That's why everything is old. If you want to take after, then you put after update. So that means after the transaction is committed. Okay, then only it takes into the after image. Clear? So that's what I have given here. You can create the trigger in SQLite. Yes, copy paste this whole thing in the here. In this case, you go and put it here. Okay, it will create. Okay, next one. You have delete trigger. So whenever you delete, before any delete, you can take a snapshot of what was the actual data and then do a delete. The next one, I'm going to introduce something called views. So what do you mean by view? View is nothing but a logical representation of the physical tables. It can be one table or more than one table. So just to give you an example, suppose now the country is sitting in a country table where a customer will be representing only the country code. So you don't know the country name. So nobody should put the country name as part of the customer, because you should only put the code. All the reference data should be sitting in another table. So in this case, I am joining the customer data table with the country, and I am joining with the country code of the customer with the country code of the country and creating the view. The view name is VW_customer. And you can query the views just like any other SQL. Okay, and you cannot update because it is it's a view. Now if you look at from the application point, the view will be available. You can type in select star from customer. Right, let me take this, bang. You see, this country name is actually coming in from here, US country, and the customer is country code is only US. So the actual attributes related to the country code will be available in a separate table, and you can just join these two in a single view. And this one, this one is a straightforward, very easy view. Okay, you can make it a bit more complex, and you can do aggregates also. Let's say you want to know that every single customer, how many orders they are placed in this month. You can create a view. You don't have to do every time join this, join that, join with order, join with country, all that thing. You don't have to do that. Create a view, keep it. So in this case, each time when you want to get the country name, you don't have to do all this inner join country, all that stuff. No, not required. You just create the view and keep it, and then subsequently you can do any other select. No difference at all. So if you put like country code equals IN, get me all those customers with IN, you may not get anything because there is nothing. So this is in US, you'll get. Okay, so this is what the view is all about. So it is very handy. So you can create the joins. Of course, there should be a relation between this table to another table. Otherwise, you will not get the accurate. So notice that the country name is derived from country table. So country name physically sits in country table. So it is joined, and you can specify during the view that country code is coming in from where, whereas the country name is coming in from where. That means where means which table. So in this case, it's coming in from country table. Clear? Next. Q&A. Okay, now we are coming to the stage where before the Q&A, I am going to show you something which is very good from the perspective of your understanding in the Java world, which is called caching data. Now, what do you mean by caching? If you look at country table, that is not going to change. The country table is not going to change at all. So every time when you want to open the connection, get the country data and all that, it's very expensive. So there is something called caching. What does it mean? Reference data, especially reference data, should be cached in the memory, and you should use it from the memory rather than every time open the connection. Okay, you want to know, or give me all the properties about number of state or number of cities in India, and you don't need to every time open the database connection to do that. So you can do Google has introduced something called Guava cache. So which is using cache. So this one is slightly complex, but once you go through the tutorial, it will be very easy. So if you look at the country, now I will show you the evolution from normal connection to the connection pool, and with the cache, you will see the difference. Let's say I will use the country query with the non-connection pool. Just watch the timing. So this guy is taking roughly 190, maybe average of 200 milliseconds, which is of course less than 1/4 of the second. Now, if you use the connection pool, it's going to use maybe 1/10. You see, 5 milliseconds or 10. No, average. Let's say we'll put it as 5 milliseconds. It's too fast. Okay, but you can still achieve more faster if you are using a reference data. You can do a Google cache. You see how fast it comes. It is 1010 like that, because the entire reference data to this client is available in the memory throughout the execution of the code. So every time when you do a search, it is not actually connecting to the database at all. it's actually loaded in the memory using mapping, which is provided by Google Guava Cache. It's called Guava, that fruit Guava, like that, Guava Cache. Okay, so if you use this, you see that 1 millisecond. Most of the time I have seen in our application, it doesn't even take beyond 1 or 2 seconds, 1 or 2 milliseconds. Sorry, 1 or 2 milliseconds. So when you are in the world of development and design, always think of using reference data to use caching. You don't have to, unless you know that the caching, the reference data keep changing every hour. Normally how we do is, I keep a timer. That means every 2 hours or 1 hour, it automatically, there is a web application, it will automatically every hour should refresh. That means whatever the data available in the country table, it should go and refetch all those and put it into the memory every hour automatic. Okay, so that way you don't lose when there is a change, because when there is a web application, web server or web application server is running, you don't shut down every day. So every hour it should go and refresh the cache. So that way you will get the latest data. But of course, if it is a transaction one, you don't cache. So, but if you are using country, station, GMT, currency, that kind of one, you should never use that. For only once you need to connect to the database, and subsequently everything should come from the memory. Okay, that's how it does. And Google has given the APIs. If you go into, I'll show you in the POM, you can actually go and do Google search, where you look for Guava Cache, this one, Guava Cache. So this is a Google API. So you can use, technically it is using in the Java hash map or the normal map. It is actually using that only, but instead of you doing all that, the Google API will do that. That's the difference. Okay, clear? Okay, now coming to the last stage. So I'm going to show you some tips and tricks of design where it will be useful for any documentation. Now, if you look at this readme.md, this is a very simple documentation about your code. And it's very easy, and it is actually promoted by GitHub. Now what it does is, any hash is like header. Okay, you look at here, it looks very clean. Okay, 2 hash is a sibling to the main. 3 hash, it is a sibling to its parent, like that, very simple. So, and any dots, if you put an asterisk, that means it's a bullet point. If you put double asterisks and embed within that some word, it will be bold. So if you look at JDK here, it's bold. You can see here, JDK is bold. And this is a very easy way of maintaining. If you look at any GitHub, any source code in the GitHub, you will see always readme.md. MD means it is markdown. It is similar, a easy way of documenting your code. Okay, so you can see all that, and very very small one. If you, I have at the end of the presentation, I have the URL where you can get more in details. So let me show you all that. Okay, so if you look at the preview, it looks neat. Okay, put all this in your code for yourself and someone reading the code. It will be very easy for people to understand about your code. Clear? Okay, so I think pretty much I have covered most of the items which were planned by Sneha madam and myself. I think we had a mock run, and this is what we wanted to cover. so that the time frame is less. So this is what we thought, this will be
Yes.
helpful for you people.
Yeah.
Now is the time to buzz.
Students, any questions?
Should I open the session?
Any questions?
My questions are there. Let me see or any chats are there. Come on. Questions.
Excuse me, sir. Hello.
Questions.
Hello.
Yep.
Sir, I had no questions. I would like to thank you for such wonderful insights on the database application system, and today's webinar is very insightful. We have learned many things, and it would really help us if you suggest any ideas on our database system management project.
Okay. No, you want me to show some example how it is used in the real world?
Yes, sir. Similar kind of.
Okay, I will take that question and I will show you definitely one of our customers how the JDBC is actually used in an application where we are presenting some kind of invoice and statements. Okay, I'll show you. Can I show you now before taking the next question?
I think you can show it now.
Let me show you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to introduce something which is a reporting tool which typically people will use for generating some kind of statements or invoice, some payment receipts or some acknowledgement, whatever. Okay. Now we are using a application tool which is called Jasper Report, which is purely written in Java, where this will be GUI based, where we design the 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 document, and subsequently we use the JDBC to connect to the database. If you look at here, this is a normal single select statement based on some user will be sending the data from the Java code, the country code, and the invoice number and which account. So that will get generated in the application. As you can see here, I preview, you can actually see that this is a application which has been developed for DHL Express for Uganda. So as you can see here, all these data is actually coming in from the tables to this tool which is called iReport. It is called Jasper iReport Designer, and the data you can either use directly a JDBC, which I have shown you here. You can directly use a JDBC, or you can send the Java POJO like customer, country, that kind of objects. You can send it to this template, which in turn can produce either an Excel or a PDF. That's how it does. And you can see that this is JDBC one, and you are getting all this information. Can you see? So we use this for creating invoices to our customer. Okay, and this is somebody would have already designed the table, but another person will be just designing the template. So that person just need to know what are all the columns. So if they want to know, okay, how do I get an account number? So they need to know which column they need to refer and get the account number, and then place it here. Suppose the customer says that no, I don't want my customer contact, delete it off. So we just delete it off. Or if they say that no, I want my customer contact should come here, just go and put it here. Okay, then you run the code. This is a preview. can see here, like that. Okay, so we use this JDBC one. We can also use the Java objects, and you can create wonderful looking, customer documents, which can be mailed over the email, or it will be available through the internet download, something like that. Okay, so whenever you people have time, you can go and browse how to do iReport Designer. This is purely written in Java, and it's open source. Whatever I have shown you so far in the 2-hour session, everything is open source. So there is absolutely a lot of information are available over the Stack Overflow, which is the #1 technical encyclopedia. So you can get all those information. Okay, did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions I can answer?
Anybody else has any questions, students? I guess that's it, I guess.
Okay, since I have a few more minutes, I will also give you some insights to, some of you might have heard some called JSON. I don't know how many people have heard something called JSON. Have you heard?
Yes, sir.
JSON XML. So in the enterprise world, where a web service communication generally happens between these two, that means either somebody will use a JSON object or an XML. So most of the people nowadays, they use the JSON because it's very easy to understand, and which is called Java Server Object Notation. So I'll just briefly give you how a JSON object look like, so it will be very easy for you to understand. So can you see the JSON object? Can you see this one? A lot of people use JSON for different purpose. We also use this for doing configuration. Now, this is an object. From here to here is one Java object, which is Java Pojo. Okay, so each country is one object. You see here, country code is directly mapped to an object called country code within the Java object. And when you see here label something like this, that means this itself is another Pojo, meaning the entire stuff is one record. From here to here is one record. Within that is another Java object. Can you see here? This is another Java object by itself, which is called label config. Okay, so think that this whole thing is a customer object, and within that this is a country. And whenever you see a square bracket, that means this is an array. Okay, so there will be many. So if you look at here, from here to here is one object. That means object number 0. Next one is object number 1. So the total size of Jasper templates will be 2. Okay, so you can use all kinds of whatever Java allows. So Boolean, number, whatever, you can see that Boolean and all that. So, and this is the list. So we use this for communicating with our, whatever the other application provider for data exchange. So this is the JSON object. Typically, it is used heavily in the web service world. Clear? Any other stuff you would like to ask? So I can more than happy to share all this which we keep doing day in, day out.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir,
when we store blob data in a database, blob basically meaning media, whatever media it is, whenever we store that, what will be the transaction time while we retrieve the object, that is the media? Retrieve it from the database and use it in the application. So
that depends on the size of the, you are asking about in terms of retrieval time, is it?
Yeah.
That depends on the size. See, typically that will be stored in the base 64. Okay. And then depending on what is the media type, whether it is an application, PDF, or an image or something, you will have a related MIME application. So if it is a PDF, it depends on, you are only sending the data in base 64 to the client. The client should know that what is the incoming media, whether it is a JPEG or a PDF or a AVI, depending on that, it has to do. So the performance will be fast, but opening on the client side, it depends.
So can you help me with some tips regarding blob data? Some tips where I should not run into some error or something while using
What kind of error? Unless you, typically what we do is when we are storing let's say a PDF or an image, we convert that to a base 64 and then insert into the database. We don't physically put directly the entire as it is. So we convert to base 64 and then put it in. So typically you have to put it as either a varchar or a text depending on the database vendor.
Yes, sir.
So if I had to give you an example how the blob is stored, let me show you one of that which we have done for India only. I'll show you one, okay? How it is stored. Which one? I need to check whether it is actually stored. Oh, yeah, here. Can you see this one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in this case, let's say the Amazon tracker. Okay, you will have a shipment tracker, right? So that particular, the barcode. Okay, the barcode is already cooked in the server, so we don't have to cook it again. So I'm just giving example. So we store that in the base 64 in this column. Okay. Subsequently, in Java, you will still use that as a normal string. You are not specifying any blob in Java. You will still specify that you are going to use that as a string. But the string which you are going to get will be in the base 64. You have to decode. And subsequently you need to send it to the right application which can actually decode this. That's how it is actually done. So when you look at from the database point, it will just show you as binary object, which is a blob. Okay, so you can typically store anything you want. It can be anything as long as you store it in the base 64. Clear?
Yes, sir. Sure. Thank you.
So if you look at from the column, this is just a byte character. The column type is byte. So depending on the database vendor, some will be text, some will be byte, some will be like varchar, some will be law. Because you are typically storing only the base 64 encoded.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Clear?
Yes, sir. Clear. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before I show you the GitHub, and then I will make the repository public so that you can actually download. Any questions?
So we can use SQLite JS for creating tables, right?
What is that?
SQLite JS.
Yeah, You mean creating the tables?
Yes, sir. For creating tables, we can use SQLite JS, right?
You can use. I'm just showing you the DB visualizer and the native SQL whatever is available. You can use any third party one. See, in our case, I'm using DB visualizer, and we are using a native SQL browser for SQLite and for H2 separate. That's all.
So, but when we use SQLite JS, we need not write the create table and all that.
Where? Where you cannot create?
In SQLite JS, we can write like exporting the table directly without like using create table command.
I don't know about the SQL JS one, but basically, if this is something similar to the DB visualizer, you can do that. But if it is just a SQL browser or some kind of JavaScript, in that case, you have to do some stuff by yourself. So I always recommend somebody to use the DB visualizer. It will be very easy for you to create table, the update, whatever DML you want to do. The front end can be anything as per your browser or the application.